On November 23, 2020, President Tsai Ing-wen spoke at the 13th General Assembly of the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats in her capacity as chair of Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party. In her speech, Tsai spoke about the Taiwan model and how Taiwan has successfully combated fake news.
And experience our vibrant democracy for yourselves. The theme of this year's General Assembly is a very important one. That is, how do we deal with the challenges to democracy, which have been made more daunting by the pandemic. And one of the challenges is disinformation. In the last few years, my government and members of civil society have been cooperating and working collectively to mitigate the scope of this infodemic, particularly under the Commission from the Hostile Foreign Powers. And since timeliness and transparency are key to effective defense against disinformation, more importantly, Taiwan's vibrant civil society and civic tech community contributed tremendously in the effort to combat disinformation while safeguarding our democratic values of free speech and expression. Organizations such as the Taiwan Fact Check Center, CoFacts, Gulf Zero, MyGoPen, Doublethink Lab, and Information Operation Research Groups are just a few examples. They published thoroughly researched and detailed reports on checked facts and playbooks on authoritarian information manipulation.
Of course, Tsai Ing-wen's administration is well versed in combating disinformation. That's because the organization behind Tsai's thesis has been attacking information for a long time now. In 2015, when word that Tsai's thesis couldn't be found anywhere started to spread, Tsai's organization circulated stories where netizens claimed her thesis could be found in the ProQuest database. However, Tsai's thesis in the ProQuest database amounted to nothing more than a catalog entry. There was no original text. The doubts established by the very first Xingdao Daily piece calling Tsai's thesis into question still stand. The article has also become the basis of Dr. Dennis Peng's case against Tsai Ing-wen, which seeks to verify that her thesis does not exist. In February 2020, ProQuest displayed two works under Tsai Ing-wen's name. However, if you look up Tsai's name now in ProQuest, there's, once again, only one entry. Someone is watching Thesis-Gate and tampering with information accordingly. In 2015, Tsai's organization labeled those that doubted Tsai's thesis as foreign powers and red agents. That rhetoric was enough to suppress doubters for a number of years. Fast forward to today, Tsai Ing-wen has yet to offer any convincing explanations. Her organization still beats the same drum, deeming those that proliferate Thesis-Gate outside forces. Tsai Ing-wen's organization isn't just tampering with information in the ProQuest database. Those that have followed along with our Thesis-Gate investigation know of a black leather-bound thesis which was successfully submitted to the LSE Women's Library in June 2019. At first, the library's digital index said the thesis had two authors. One was Tsai and the other was the person Tsai claimed was her advisor, Michael John Elliott. After the public called attention to how strange that was, the index entry was changed back to one author. The digital catalog entry for Tsai's thesis in the British Library was created in June 2015. That index also had its date of award altered from 1984 to 1983. These are all strange circumstances surrounding Tsai and her thesis. At the end of the day, Tsai can chalk these changes up to simple errors made by administrative bodies. After all, it looks like the University of London is willing to support such claims. Tsai can say that these actions have nothing to do with her. However, there is one particular change that Tsai can't put on anyone else. That change concerns her autobiography, which we discussed in the last episode. Specifically, it concerns the picture Tsai said was taken in London, but we then proved it was actually taken outside of St. Paul's Cathedral in Boston, USA. The photograph in question was the only reliable piece of information we had about Tsai Ing-wen's Viva from Tsai herself. However, netizens have since exposed the picture as a fabrication. Just as the public wondered how the presidential office would respond to this latest development, Tsai quietly changed the picture's caption in the digital version of her autobiography. The caption now reads, "A picture with my sister," instead of "My sister flew to London to be with me during my Viva." This is unbelievable. Tsai Ing-wen changed the contents of her autobiography in broad daylight. This action is tantamount to Tsai admitting that the photo was not taken in London. The original photo caption is just another lie that can be added to the pile. Should we be surprised? After all, the presidential office is no stranger to such manipulation. At this point, altering information in an autobiography seems like small potatoes.
他最后的博士资格考试也是我陪他去的，我陪他在英国过了2个礼拜，那个2个礼拜我们玩得还挺开心的。
Did Tsai Ing-ling really spend 2 weeks in London with Tsai Ing-wen? Are there really no photographs of the happy times these two sisters shared in England? Or is this how Tsai's grandiose lie begins to unravel? In the same way that Tsai tampers with information, she must adjust the narrative of her lies, and we'll be here to expose them one by one. Why does Tsai's organization continue to meddle in Thesis-Gate and disseminate fake news when they know full well that their lies will be debunked? Tsai Ing-wen said during her speech at CALD, her administration is waging a war on perception. Just as she does battle with fake information from hostile powers, she uses similar strategies and methods to do away with Thesis-Gate.
现在有很多人也都没有否认有论文这件事情嘛，不是吗？
总统在取得学位这些或者是取得这个博士的这些证书，这个相关的过程，那包括政大、教育部、中选会，那么这么长的这个时间以来，都经过这些机构的各阶段严谨的验证，所以他的学位绝对没有问题。
Tsai Ing-wen has set up many firewalls to maintain her power. We saw how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs assisted her fight in the courts. However, the Foreign Ministry is just one of her safeguards. Tsai also uses her capacity and a position to create and spread false information. She then uses the fake information she created as evidence that her lies are valid. It's a never-ending cycle of self-vindication. Tsai's spun narrative is then used to morph her supporters' perceptions. Many fact-checking agencies dismiss the accusations levied against Tsai and her thesis. However, not one of those agencies have ever read Dr. Huan Si-lin's independent report on Tsai's thesis and responded to it. Either that or they pretend it doesn't exist. Tsai has taken control of the online narrative. Next, she has to control the message on television. There is little to no coverage of Tsai's education in mainstream media outlets. It's as if the media has forfeit its role as the fourth estate, where they should be keeping the government accountable. The strange thing is, even opposition-aligned media outlets have nothing to say. The reason for this is because the government has spent billions of dollars over the past 4 years placing messages in programs. The Satellite Broadcasting Act stipulates government agencies can't employ placement marketing in news reports or children's programs. However, Tsai's administration not only ignores this law, they've even compiled the price quotes from media outlets. Where did we obtain these price quotes? It was anonymously shared to a Centers for Disease Control online chat group for reporters on May 22, 2020 at 9:23 a.m. It was subsequently taken down at 9:26 a.m. Is someone messing with the presidential office? Just like with the Boston photograph, the presidential office has yet to respond in any way. Tsai Ing-wen's administration is dialing up pressure on the Thesis-Gate movement. Aside from offering billions of dollars in contracts to the media over the past 4 years, the government has also resorted to harsher measures. Enter the National Communications Commission. In November, the commission voted unanimously against renewing the license of CTI News. The commission cited 4 major reasons for not renewing CTI's license, but we must point out that the problems cited are issues all news outlets in Taiwan have. The public consensus is that CTI News' closure was politically charged.
对外界质疑有政治力介入中天换照案，行政长苏贞昌也做出了回应，指出这一。
The next media outlet to keep a close eye on is the China Times newspaper, which is part of the same conglomerate as CTI. In 2019, the China Times didn't shy away from reporting on Tsai's thesis, going so far as to interview the 3 scholars shortly before Taiwan's presidential election. The newspaper even spent formidable resources to conduct an interview with Dr. Huan Xilin in the United States. However, after Taiwan's presidential election, the China Times had no choice but to give up on their Thesis-Gate investigation, despite there being many new leads. Dr. Huan Xilin thanked China Times for its interest in Thesis-Gate on Facebook, but pointed out that after Tsai's second-term inauguration, it no longer published stories on the matter. Whether or not Taiwan's presidential office actually exerts pressure on Taiwan's media outlets is up to our viewers to decide, but the answer looks pretty clear-cut from here. Once Tsai's organization had public opinion and the media under control, the only thing left for it to do was to change any outlying information not consistent with its story. Anything that would work against Tsai's organization was taken off the internet. This made it difficult for ordinary members of the public to properly understand Thesis-Gate. Say an entry-level media worker or a foreign correspondent suddenly takes interest in Thesis-Gate. Their first instinct would be to conduct research online. When they start, they'd be inundated with stories curated by Tsai's organization that claim Tsai has a legitimate degree. At that point, would that interested party continue looking into Thesis-Gate to find the proper truth? This is exactly why Tsai continues tampering with information, despite the fact that people know she's weaving false stories. Tampering with information is a key step in altering perceptions. Wikipedia plays an important role in Thesis-Gate. The first Wikipedia entry about Tsai's education was created on January 24, 2006, 9:04 p.m. It was created by someone using the IP address 140.122.1.98. That IP address is from National Taiwan University. The very next day, on January 25, 2006, Tsai Ing-wen took office as Taiwan's vice premier. The following year, on July 1, 2007, the Education Ministry collaborated with the London School of Economics to create the school's Taiwan Research Program. Shi Fanglong was appointed director of the Taiwan Research Program. On August 1st of that year, LSE received an anonymous donation of £480,000 to be used at the discretion of one Fanglong Shi. From 2010 onwards, information about Tsai Ing-wen's teaching career in Taiwan began to surface on her Wikipedia page. The Chinese description of her experience is vague at best. It says that Tsai became a consultant at the Economics Ministry and taught at NCCU and Soochow University upon returning from London. There is no information as to the duration or time of her tenure at any of these institutions. In 2018, Tsai's Wikipedia page said Tsai returned to Taiwan in 1984 and moved to Taipei. That same year, she became an associate professor at NCCU, later becoming a full professor. In 1991, Soochow University invited her to teach graduate-level courses. All the information had now become consistent. The story was that Tsai came back to Taiwan in 1984 and began teaching at NCCU. In 1991, she then went to Soochow University. This is the account the presidential office has given. But is that story really true, or is it just the story that the public is meant to perceive as true? (1983) is a crucial year in this Thesis-Gate investigation. It is a year filled with contradictions and timelines that don't add up. In one timeline, Tsai is mostly in Taiwan. In another, she is mostly in London. Let's take a look at the information we have from the presidential office. It says Tsai's thesis topic was approved on January 19, 1983. By June, Tsai submitted her thesis and she completed her viva on October 16th. If we go by the presidential office's account, Tsai was in London for the majority of 1983. She wrote a 400-page thesis in 5 months and completed her viva on October 16th. But while looking for classified documents regarding Tsai's teaching career in the National Archives, we found an interesting document from May 31st, 1983 that says, regarding overseas student Tsai Ing-wen's request to teach at this school's law department, faculty is currently operating at maximum capacity. There are no classes available for Tsai to teach. We are sorry for this inconvenience. First, how is a student who should be in the midst of writing her thesis in 1983 able to apply for a teaching position at NCCU? There was no internet or video chats back then, so there was no way the process could have been done remotely. Furthermore, the United Daily News published an article by Tsai Ing-wen in their October 20th, 1983 newspaper. The article said Tsai held a PhD in international economics. Back then, submissions to publications couldn't be made online. The UDN article was published 6 months before Tsai's supposed graduation date and 4 days after her viva. How is any of this possible? There are loads of contradictions. Not only that, but Tsai's student record shows that she withdrew from her course on October 12, 1982. Going by this information, then we can assume Tsai was in Taiwan in 1983, submitting articles to newspapers as a phony PhD, doing so to break into the academic circle. Tsai Ing-wen was definitely in Taiwan in 1983. If Tsai Ing-wen was in Taiwan in 1983, then she couldn't have been in London getting a PhD. Throughout Thesis-Gate, longtime educator Professor Oh Cong-jing has constantly voiced his doubts over Tsai's credentials. Early on, Professor Oh claimed that Tsai began her education career as a lecturer and worked her way up to associate professor. During a hearing on November 28, 2019, he asked the Education Ministry and NCCU to provide Tsai's lecturer number.
刚才听到教育部的高教司司长的发言，也还有浙大的副校长的发言。那么这边有几个资料，要请高教部的高教司司长和政大这边呢，是不是可以提供来作为佐证啊？第一个是蔡英文女士。当时在1983年到1986年之间，因为刚才副校长说1986年1月核准他的副教授证，所以是不是提供他的讲师证的字号和副教授证的字号？
他是聘任，不是升等。那在这种情况之下，也就是说，政大是从民国73年的8月1号。聘任蔡英文先生为本校的副教授。那当时是适用旧制，因此并没有讲师这样的证书这样的一个说法。那是直接聘任为副教授的。
During a press conference, the presidential office misdirected information. It had people believe that NCCU was the first school Tsai Ing-wen taught at upon her return to Taiwan. This was a success on their part. Combined with the fact Tsai's promotion documents have been marked classified and sealed away until 2049, Tsai's organization made it very difficult for the Thesis-Gate investigations to make any important breakthroughs. It wasn't until the Lin Huan graduate thesis incident that there was a significant development. Tsai Ing-wen advised Lin Huan on his master's thesis at Soochow University in 1983. Before she was even at NCCU, Tsai was teaching at Soochow University. This adds up considering Tsai's student record indicates she left her program in 1982. After learning of Tsai's role in Lin Huan's master's thesis, we at EPM tried to use our connections to obtain NCCU and Soochow University documents through alumnus and enrolled students. However, those efforts were fruitless. Even the school's libraries took down relevant publications that would have assisted our investigation. However, well-established netizens were able to pull off a miracle. One internet user provided EPM with an important article from April 1984. This article was authored by Soochow University Adjunct Associate Professor Tsai Ing-wen. This article is proof that Tsai's first teaching job upon returning to Taiwan was not at NCCU, but at Soochow University. Regardless of how Wikipedia and the presidential office want to alter history, this is the truth. Our next question is, when exactly did Tsai Ing-wen begin working at Soochow University? If Tsai was an adjunct associate professor at Soochow University in April 1984, that means the latest she could have begun working there was August 1st, 1983. This reality is exactly why she had to seal away her teaching career records, to convince everyone that her time at NCCU was her first job upon returning to Taiwan and not her second. However, the publication that contained the article no longer exists, so Tsai can put the blame on the publication and call it a misprint. When EPM first received the article, we did not publicize it because we wanted to have an airtight case. We needed solid proof of Tsai's employment as an adjunct associate professor from Soochow University itself in order for this evidence to hold water. It was at this point when EPM received a helping hand. A professor who entered Soochow University in the 70s reached out to EPM and said he possessed the school's faculty directories between the years 1981 and 1997. Last Tuesday, EPM received a mysterious package that would deal a devastating blow to one of Tsai's most crucial lies. Tsai Ing-wen's name shows up in the Soochow University 1983 to 1984 faculty directory, which was printed in January 1984. This proved, once and for all, that Tsai Ing-wen started teaching at Soochow University in August 1983 as an adjunct associate professor. If Tsai Ing-wen was teaching at Soochow University in August 1983, then how could she have been in London writing a thesis or preparing for a viva? Will the presidential office now tamper with Soochow University's faculty directory? Thesis-Gate could have been over a long time ago, had Tsai not sealed away her teaching career records. If we could see those documents, we'd be able to piece together what happened all those years ago in 1983. Lin Huan's master's thesis debacle and the 1983 to 1984 Soochow University faculty directory will be hard to explain. Even now, the presidential office has nothing to say. No response. The University of London is still observing the tide from faraway England. They're looking to see if any of the evidence in Taiwan intersects with anything in England. However, we urge the University of London to comply with our efforts to expose Tsai Ing-wen. Tsai's firewall will only weaken over time. Truth and justice are at hand, and they are inevitable.